Strategic planning is what can help your school go from good to great. It demonstrates leadership and vision, gets everyone aligned with the mission, and is more important today than ever. A school I recently worked with told me that even though this past year has been a crazy ride, having the strategic plan gave them the guiding rails to move forward. In the next half hour, I'm going to share with you the 6 key steps and provide some tools for you to use to get started on developing a strategic plan for your school. I'll also share some tips I've learned through my experience developing strategic plans for over 40 Catholic schools across the US, from Texas to California to Massachusetts, and lots of great Midwestern schools too. Hello, I'm Kathleen Casey. I'm a full-time partner with Partners in Mission, a consulting firm dedicated to advancing the mission and important work of Catholic schools. I've been with Partners in Mission for 4 years now, and prior to that was Associate Superintendent for the Diocese of Bridgeport in Connecticut. I've also served as head of Immaculate High School, and have also taught at the elementary level. But I actually began my career in corporate America as a strategic planner with General Motors. I'm looking forward to sharing with you what I've learned through my 30 years of successfully developing and implementing strategic plans. So, what is strategic planning? Very simply, it's a transformational process that provides the bridge between the mission and the vision. You may notice in this graphic that the bridge is made up of people. And that is a key difference between corporate strategic planning and Catholic school strategic planning. Because when I was at General Motors, I just needed the support of my CFO to sign off, and I had the budget and resources I need to implement the plan. But in Catholic schools, you need the support of your key stakeholders, so you'll have the resources to implement the plan. At Partners in Mission, we believe that involvement inspires investment, and this is the key to successful strategic planning. But you don't just go from mission to vision. There's a few steps in between. The strategic plan timeframe is typically 3 to 5 years, and the strategic planning process, that is to develop a strategic plan, takes about 6 to 9 months. So in the next 30 minutes, I won't be able to go into too much detail, but I will provide an overview of all 6 steps with a deeper dive on steps number 3 and number 4 in order to give you some tools and examples that you could use to get started with strategic planning for your school. So let's get started. Step number 1, everything starts with mission. Before you get started with your strategic plan, you need to review and affirm your mission. When is the last time you really looked at your mission? We recommend that the mission statement should be reviewed every year. And you can review it by intentionally reading each word of your mission statement, and do this with both your board and your faculty and staff, and then have them sign off on it. Typically, mission statements don't change too much, but some schools have recently updated their mission statements by adding the word diversity or phrases that relate to inclusiveness. We aren't going to spend too much time on mission because most Catholic schools have strong mission statements. But here's a quick review. A mission statement is about the school's fundamental purpose. The mission motivates us to do what we do and inspires people to invest in our school by sending their children or giving their time, talent, and treasure. And this is so important. And we also need to continually expand this group of people who support our schools in order to increase our enrollment or our resources. And that leads us to step number 2, engaging key stakeholders. Who are stakeholders? These are the people who have a vested interest in your school. And a great way to engage them is to ask them for advice. You may have heard the old adage, ask people for money and they give you advice. Well, we turn this around and ask for advice so people will give you their Christian stewardship of time, talent, and treasure. Remember, involvement inspires investment. I'd love to share some stories about the amazing ways I've seen people come forward to support Catholic schools, and hopefully you even have some of your own. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to provide a list of some of the examples of people who can help you with your school. Who are these key stakeholders? They are the users, the providers, the influencers, their employees and customers and supporters. who can bring their perspective and expertise other than what we may already know, because we live in the echo chamber in which we work. But we need people who have a different perspective. This list here that you see on the screen right now is a complete list. Is not a complete list. It includes alumni and board members, parents and alumni parents, of course, your faculty and staff, your students. But there may be other stakeholders who could help your school. Maybe your school is sponsored by a particular order, so you would like to involve the sisters or the brothers. Or maybe there's people in that are community first responders, the police or fire chief, that could help you look at the safety of your school, who by looking through their lens and seeing things differently will help you to better understand your school. And the next slide helps illustrate this principle of looking through a different lens. When you look at this image, who do you see? Do you see an old lady or a young beauty? If you don't see both, you can pause the video to get a longer list. But I'll try and give you a couple of hints here. If you see the young lady, this is her profile, this dark spot is her hair, this is her eyelash, and then this is the outline of her chin. And she has a feather in her hat. If you the picture or the vision of the old lady here is that this is her nose here, and then her chin is more buried into this dark shawl, this furry shawl that's over her shoulders. And this is sort of a big hat that she's wearing. So the reason that I show you that image is that you can look at it two different ways, just like people can look at your school in more than one ways. And it's really helpful to have those different perspectives. Board members can be very helpful in bringing their perspectives and sharing their expertise. I'll share a personal story of how a board member helped me when I was head of Immaculate High School. This happened about 12 years ago when we were planning to update our computer lab by adding more RAM to the desktops. Back then, many schools were doing it. It was a common practice. But one of my board members asked me, "Hey, Kathleen, what about a mobile strategy?" I'd heard about laptops on carts and said, "Is that what you're talking about?" But he was thinking much bigger and broader. He was bringing his expertise from the corporate technology world to challenge me and Immaculate to be on the leading edge with technology, so our students could learn with a new platform and be engaged with the latest techniques and tools. As a result, my board member asking me this challenging question and bringing his expertise, we became the first high school in all of Connecticut to use iPads as personal learning devices for all of our students. And it was transformational. As you might imagine, this wasn't a simple process, but it was strategic, and it took about 3 years to put in place. First of all, we had to upgrade the infrastructure, the technology infrastructure. We need to provide professional development for our faculty and staff on using these devices before we got them into the hands of our students. And then, of course, we had to develop the processes and protocols for the students to use once they had the iPads. This is just one of many stories and examples of how stakeholders can provide feedback and advice. This can happen informally through conversations or more formally through focus groups and surveys. And you use this feedback and input from the stakeholders to help assess your school, to help you identify what you're doing well and areas where you could improve, which brings us to step number 3. Step number 3 is analyze and assess the different domains or the areas of your school. You don't just need stakeholder feedback and input. You also need to look at data, because data drives strategy. You need to look at the benchmarks of how you are doing, and you also need to identify trends. For example, trends in enrollment. Is your enrollment going up, moving in the right direction? Is your donor giving increasing? Are you increasing your number of young alumni donors? Or for example, you may be looking at a domain or area of academics, and you'd want to look at your test scores. Are the test scores comparable to those of the competition? Are your test scores remaining strong, or have they gone down in certain areas over the last couple of years? You can see that we're looking at specific areas of enrollment or of advancement or of academics, because when you assess your school, You don't just look at the school as a whole. You break the school down into specific domains or areas to assess. And typically, there are 8 domains or areas of focus that you look at when you're assessing your school. As you can see, these domains are all centered around the main domain of Catholic identity or the charism of your school. And all of the domains are interconnected like Olympic rings, because of course, enrollment, which brings in the income stream of tuition, is tied to finance and probably provides around 80% of your budget. Then there's also advancement that may provide scholarships that also would be tied to the finance or the budget domain. So we look at all of these domains individually, but we don't look at them in silos. We recognize that there are some overlap between all these various areas. The 8 domains are academics, which is the curriculum, the student life, which can also be referred to as the co-curriculum, the service, the fine arts, the athletics, clubs, everything outside of the actual core curriculum. Advancement is the fundraising, finance is the budget, enrollment is both recruitment and retention, and we're going to focus on that going forward. Facilities is obviously where your student, what is provided for your student to learn, the overall makeup of the facility itself in terms of the building, but also the grounds. And then the governance is that structure that to provide support that oversees the school. That may be a diocesan governance model, or it could be a sponsored school. It could be an order of the brothers or the sisters. It could be a board of limited jurisdiction or an advisory board. It's all very different. And depending on your school and how you're set up, you would look at it through that perspective. I mentioned that there are 8 domains, but we don't have time to go through each of these 8 domains in detail for today's presentation. So instead, I'm going to just focus on enrollment, which is a critical domain for many schools. When we think about enrollment, we need to consider why people choose our school. And this is an example of thinking strategically, understanding the value proposition of what people are willing to pay for. Quite often I hear, oh, the local public school is good and they're free. But you know what? Water's also free, but people spend money on bottled water because it offers additional benefits. Just like Catholic education offers more than just education that is at the public school, we also form our students. We have additional benefits that people are willing to pay for. So in the following examples, we're going to focus on enrollment, and I'm going to be addressing enrollment from both the issues of recruitment and retention. And some specific data points that you may want to look at when you're assessing enrollment are for example, upcoming school year applicants compared to last year. Do we have as many students that applied last year or more? What about the yield rate, the percent of accepted students who actually end up enrolling and coming to our school? We'll look at the retention, and we don't want to look at retention just for 1 year, but we want to look at it probably for the last 5 years, again, to look at the trend and see, are we moving in the right direction? That can affect the current and projected total enrollment for the next 5 years. We also are going to be looking at external factors. For example, what are the projected local demographics in our surrounding area, or the birth rates? Because that's going to affect how many students are in our area that may be able to come to our school that we could ultimately reach out to recruit. Another factor or a data point that you might want to look at is your tuition. And actually, how does that tuition compare to competition over the last 5 years? So again, for the purpose of today's session, we're going to be focusing on enrollment. If you want to know more, a deep dive on retention, I'm going to give a quick shout out to my partner, Kathy Link from Partners in Mission, who's doing an NCEA presentation on retention. We'll be looking at it a little bit, but only in light of strategic planning. We're going to be doing this deep dive on retention and demographics in this presentation, and I'm going to show you a simple tool that you can use to assess and analyze your school, and that's called a SWOT chart. SWOT, S-W-O-T, stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You can see there's basically 4 boxes. Those 4 boxes are on different axes. The horizontal axis on the left is positive and on the right is negative. The horizontal axis is internal and external. The vertical axes are positive and negative. So when you look at the SWOT box, you'll see on the left the positive axis that's vertical, the negative axis that's vertical. The internal horizontal axis is at the top and the external horizontal axis at the bottom. So the box in the upper left corner is positive and internal. It's a strength. So strength of many Catholic schools is a safe and secure environment. In the upper right-hand corner is the internal negative. That's the weakness box or the issues. The issue may be low enrollment. In the bottom left-hand corner is the positive but external box. That is opportunities. What I mean by the external environment is something outside of what you control. The internal environment are things and factors that you can control inside your school, but the external environment, you have no control over. There's more working parents, but it could be a positive for you because if there's more working parents, they may need before and after care, which you could provide at your school for your students, which would be an additional revenue stream. Or on the other hand, the external negative could be a threat of a demographic of a decreasing number of school-aged children. You can't have an effect on how many students are being or how many children are being born, but ultimately that would have an impact on your school. So you have to be aware of what's going on in the external environment and how it may be affecting your school. Also in the external environment are things like the competition. So these are all things that we want to work at and look at when we're doing the assessment. For the purposes of today, though, I've kept it pretty simple and just put in one example for a strength, a weakness, and an opportunity and a threat. And doing this exercise obviously takes a lot of work, especially if you're thinking about all 8 domains, right? The academics, the advancement, the Catholic identity, the enrollment, the facilities, finance, governance, and student life. But that's a great way to engage your board. Doing this exercise is excellent to sit down and ask them for their input. So you can pause the video here if you'd like to work on this a little bit yourself, thinking about what strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats are. And you can think about that using my enrollment example, or if you want to think about one of the other domains, you could do that too. For the purposes of the next slide, though, we're going to focus on the box in the upper right-hand corner, the internal negative or the weaknesses. This is where we define our issues to help you understand what you need to address in order to make your school go from good to great. All right, so here we are. This is a blow up of that box in the upper right, the internal negative. It's using the enrollment example that there are fewer students available for recruitment. That's an issue, right? And that came out of the demographic data. We don't really have any control over it, but it is a fact or a reality that we have to deal with. Another issue could be that students are not staying through graduation. This would be retention data. This may be something that we have more control over, right? We could put in place some strategies that may help them stay. When you look at the weaknesses and issues, there are a lot of issues you may need to address. But what we do in strategic planning is prioritize and look at the top issues. Because being strategic is deciding what to do and what not to do. You have limited resources, so you need to prioritize the allocation of your resources and focusing on the top issues where you can make the biggest impact to go from good to great, the things that you want to focus on. So for today's purposes, we're going to look at the overall weakness was low enrollment. The issues were fewer students available for recruitment, and students are not staying through graduation. So I'm going to show you how you take those issues and you address those issues with objectives, right? The objectives essentially are the solution to those issues. So, for example, you have fewer students available for recruitment due to changing demographics. One of the objectives could be to expand the target market to include 6 weeks old to 2-year-olds. One of the elementary schools that I'm working with assessed their school. They knew one of their strengths was providing a safe and secure environment. They also wanted to more closely align with their parish to help strengthen the faith lives of the families. They know the parents have to pay for daycare for 6 weeks old to 2-year-olds. And they thought to themselves, that's something that they can provide at their school. And there are Catholic schools today, maybe you know of some, that do provide the 6-week-old to 2-year-old considered daycare at their Catholic schools. And it's been a huge income stream for them, right? It expands the enrollment number and also provides a whole new track of students that could come, those 6 weeks old to 2-year-olds that were currently part of our student body. Now you may be saying, wow, I couldn't do that. Well, you couldn't in a year, but you know what? Remember, strategic plans take 3 to 5 years to implement. So over the next 3 to 5 years, could you hire the staff that's needed? Could you upgrade your facilities to meet the needs and requirements for the 6 weeks old to 2-year-olds? Could you get the accreditation or certification that you needed? Absolutely. So this is a very strategic and transformational objective that the school is coming up with by expanding that target market. Another issue that's that we're looking at is students are not staying through graduation, right? But what we need to do is use data-driven analysis to better understand when and why students are leaving. So that would be the objective. The issue is they're leaving, but the objective of using the data-driven analysis is going to help us address the issue, right? We need to understand when they're leaving. Are they leaving after pre-K, before kindergarten? Are they leaving after 5th grade, going into middle school? Or are they coming freshman year to a high school, but then not staying into sophomore year? And in order to do that, we should also think about why students are leaving. That freshman that didn't stay through to sophomore year, was it because they didn't feel connected to the school? Or was it maybe an academic issue? You can look at why students are leaving. You can see some red flags. Sometimes if there's a lot of tardies or if they have low grades, those are the red flags to understanding why students are leaving. And you can proactively look at some of these issues. Or sometimes it's simply a matter of finance or tuition. Are the families struggling to pay tuition? But by understanding the why, we can then come up with more specific ways to address that and get out in front of the issue. And that brings us to defining goals and objectives, step number 4. This is what provides a strategic direction for our schools to go from good to great. So I gave you the example of the objectives in that earlier slide, which was the initiative or activity that's going to help achieve the strategic goal. It's a priority that was set because they're going to be addressing the top issues. And objectives are typically quantitative. Objectives address how the strategic goal will be achieved. And again, those enrollment examples for the objectives were to expand the target market, to include the 6 weeks old or 2-year-olds, and to use the data-driven analysis to better understand when and why students are leaving. The strategic goal is bigger than the objective. The strategic goal broadly defines the desired outcome for the domain area. You remember the 8 domains? So you typically have one strategic goal for each of the 8 domains. So you would have a strategic goal for academics, another one for advancement, Catholic identity, enrollment, facilities, finance, governance, or student life. And those objectives take 3 to 5 years to achieve, and they're qualitative. They talk about what we want to accomplish. So you typically have about 8 strategic goals for each when you're developing a strategic plan, but you have more objectives because those objectives address the issues. An example of the strategic goal, that big broad outcome, would be the school will achieve optimal enrollment by providing children in our greater community the opportunity for an excellent Christ-centered education where all feel welcome and thrive. So you can see that's a big, broad outcome for the domain area of enrollment. And now tying it all together, you can see how the objectives that we talked about that address the issues help achieve the overall strategic goal. So again, quick review, the strategic goal is the big, broad outcome. There's typically one per domain. And then there's a few objectives that help you accomplish each of the strategic goals. The actual number of objectives you have usually ties to how many top issues you've defined, which we like to keep it to about 4 to 6 top issues for each domain area, just so that it's a manageable number. Now, once you've drafted your strategic goals and objectives, they won't do you any good if the plan just lives on the shelf or in a binder. The plan needs to be implemented and tracked and managed to be a living document that is used to hold people accountable and help drive them towards success. And the way you do this is to develop key performance indicators in each of your domain areas, the domain areas of academics, advancement, Catholic identity, enrollment, facilities, finance, governance, and student life. And the key performance indicators, they are the metrics and measures for success. They're going to demonstrate to you the effectiveness of your results, and they're quantifiable. They are typically numbers or dollar figures or percentages. Sticking with the enrollment example, here are some examples of a KPI and metric. Here's one, a best practice retention is to have 88 to 93% retention rate in your school. So if you're not there, you might, if you're currently at 72%, you couldn't set a goal of 88% for the next year, but over the next 3 to 5 years, you would set increasingly higher percentage goals so that ultimately you can get to this best practice of 88 to 93%. Or you could set a total enrollment number. So maybe your school, if you have an elementary school, you maybe have 200 and you want to move that number towards 250 over the next 3 to 5 years. Or if you're at a high school and you currently have 400, maybe you want to get that number closer to 500. So whatever that particular metric is that fits for your school, you establish that. Or schools that think big and bold sometimes have to set goals for a capital campaign or major gift campaign. So remembering the school that wanted to increase their enrollment by expanding from 6 weeks to 2 years, well, they're going to have a major capital campaign for raising the money for converting a convent that's on their facility to a daycare center. So there's all different metrics and measures that you can set, but some of the ones that relate specifically to what we talked about today would be the retention, enrollment numbers, or raising money for a capital campaign. When you set this metric or measure, this percent or the dollar figure or number, you might want to keep in mind the acronym SMART, which stands for specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, and timely. Because that's really important to have all of those specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, and timely figures so that you know when you've achieved your vision. During the implementation phase, over the 3 to 5 years, you continually need to track and manage the implementation of the plan as you move towards the successfully achieving the vision. You should also share each achievement or milestone along the way in order to keep people excited, engaged, and give them something to cheer for. So, what is a vision? The definition of vision is a statement about the future and the school's role in it. It answers who we want to be or who we want to serve and what we will achieve. And here's a good example, I think, of a vision statement. St. Mary's School will be the school of choice for families, the employer of choice for faculty and staff, and the investment of choice for donors. This vision statement is inspirational and aspirational. So we really covered a lot of ground today. I'm going to give you a quick review of our takeaways. First thing we did is we covered the 6 steps of strategic planning. mission that we review and affirm before beginning, to engage and involve your greater community and key stakeholders. Step number 3, to do the assessment and the analysis, to understand what are your strengths and weaknesses, what are the opportunities and threats in each of the 8 domain areas of academics, advancement, Catholic identity, enrollment, facilities, finance, governance, and student life. The drafting of goals and objectives for each one of those domain areas. And then ultimately the implementation and the tracking and managing of the plan so that you can achieve your vision. The key points: strategic planning in Catholic schools needs to involve the greater community. I can't stress the importance of stakeholder involvement and building relationships that will be supportive of the school by providing time, talent, and treasure so that you can implement the strategic plan. Also, you need to prioritize the areas of where you're going to improve or what's being addressed by the strategic plan by doing the SWOT analysis and understanding what are the top issues that should be addressed, and then writing objectives that address those issues. I gave you a couple of tips, some tools, and examples, mostly on enrollment, that you could use to get started with strategic planning. What are the outcomes of a strategic plan? Well, it gives your school strategic direction. That's something also that the board is really responsible for, so you want to make sure that they get involved. It's aligned with your mission, because everything we do in Catholic schools, every decision we make should be aligned with the mission. And it's developed by the stakeholders, the people that have a vested interest, and supported by the greater community. So you have the time, talent, and treasure to make your school go from good to great. So strategic planning does take a lot of work. I'm sure you got that idea from this presentation, but I want to let you know it's worth it. And hopefully this quote that I'm going to share from you, it's an email that I got just a few weeks ago from Sean Foster, who's the principal of Central Catholic High School. He wrote to me, "The strategic plan we recently completed has already had a tremendous impact on our school. This process has crystallized our vision for our future, provided the necessary tools to achieve our goals, and generated excitement and engagement for our community. Even in the midst of the pandemic, the work we completed provided me a better understanding of my role as principal and freed me up to prioritize and focus on the needs of our school. And a year that has presented numerous challenges, it really has been my easiest year as principal as a direct result of us developing the strategic plan." So I couldn't have said it better myself, that strategic planning is important, it works, it makes a difference, and actually will make you a better leader and your school a better place. So how do you get started? Start with step 1. And remember, the process takes 6 to 9 months, but go ahead, take the first step with your board. They're responsible for helping you set the strategic direction and going from good to great. Begin discussions about your mission. That's a great place to start. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at kcasey@partnersandmission.com. I'd love to answer any questions you may have or help you get started. Also, remember, you aren't alone. We're guided by the Holy Spirit. So throughout the process of strategic planning, be prayerful and ask for guidance and counsel, because truly, as we work with all of our key stakeholders and our board members to develop this plan, it's not our plan, it's truly God's plan. So our school can be the great school that God meant it for it to be. So good luck. And again, feel free to reach out with any questions or help you may need with strategic planning to Kathleen Casey at partnersandmission.com.